Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about something that a lot of people get completely wrong in relationships. You think the way to get his attention, to make him call you, to make him text you, is to do more, to say more, to show up more. But I'm here to tell you today, sometimes the real power is in doing less. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go deeper into this first truth, because this right here is where the shift begins. Pulling back your energy creates curiosity and pursuit. Now, I need you to understand something very clearly. Energy is not just what you do. It is how you show up. It is your attention, your time, your consistency, your emotional presence. And when you give that energy freely, constantly, without pause, it becomes something that is expected rather than appreciated. Now listen carefully. This is not because you are not valuable. It is because human nature works in a very specific way. When something is always there, always available, always responding, the mind stops recognizing it as something that could be lost. And when there is no sense of loss, there is no urgency. Now let's break this down. When you are always the one texting first, always the one continuing the conversation, always the one making sure the connection stays alive, something happens. You take on the role of maintaining the entire dynamic. And when one person carries that responsibility alone, the other person naturally becomes passive, not always intentionally, but gradually. Now I want you to understand something deeply. Attraction needs space to breathe. It cannot grow in constant pressure. It cannot develop when one person is doing all the work. It needs moments of pause. It needs moments where the other person has to think, has to feel, has to wonder. And that only happens when you step back. Now listen carefully. Pulling back your energy does not mean disappearing completely. It does not mean ignoring someone who is genuinely trying. It means stopping the overgiving. It means stopping the habit of filling every silence, fixing every gap, and carrying every interaction. It means allowing space to exist. Now let's go deeper. When you reduce your energy, something very interesting happens. The rhythm of the interaction changes. The person who is used to your constant presence now experiences a shift. The messages are not as frequent. The responses are not as immediate. The emotional availability is not as automatic. And that difference creates awareness. Now, I want you to understand something important. Awareness leads to curiosity. Because when something changes, the mind wants to understand why. It starts asking questions. Why is she not texting like before? Why is she quieter? What is she doing now? Is something different? And that curiosity pulls attention back toward you. Now listen carefully. Curiosity is one of the strongest forces in attraction. When someone becomes curious about you, they start thinking about you without being prompted. They start noticing your absence. They start remembering your presence. They start wanting to reconnect with that energy. And that is where pursuit begins. Now let's go deeper. When you are constantly available, there is no need for pursuit. Everything is already there. But when you create space, when you step back slightly, you introduce uncertainty. And uncertainty, when balanced correctly, creates interest, because now nothing feels guaranteed. Now I want you to understand something deeply. And pulling back your energy is not manipulation, it is restoration of balance. Because if you are always giving more than you are receiving, the connection becomes one-sided. And one-sided connections do not create strong attraction. They create comfort without effort. But attraction requires effort. Now listen carefully. When you step back, you are not forcing someone to come toward you. You are giving them the opportunity to choose to come toward you. And that choice is important, because when someone chooses to invest, their investment becomes meaningful. Now let's go deeper into behavior. When your energy is reduced, the other person either steps forward or stays where they are. If they step forward, it means there was interest that needed space to activate. If they stay where they are, it means the connection was never balanced to begin with. And that clarity is valuable. Now I want you to understand something very important. Many people are afraid to pull back because they think they will lose the person. But the truth is, if stepping back causes someone to disappear, they were never fully present in the first place. And holding on tighter would not have changed that. Now listen carefully. When you stop overgiving, you stop chasing. When you stop chasing, you stop creating pressure. And when pressure is removed, natural behavior appears. People show their true level of interest when they are not being pulled. And that truth allows you to see clearly. Now let's go deeper. Pulling back also shifts your focus. Instead of constantly thinking about what he is doing, what he is saying, when he will text, you start focusing on your own life, your own growth, your own priorities, your own happiness. And that shift in focus changes your energy completely, because now you are not waiting, you are living. Now I want you to understand something deeply. A person who is focused on their own life naturally becomes more attractive. Not because they are trying to impress, but because they are not dependent on external attention. Their energy is grounded. Their presence is calm. Their actions are intentional. And that kind of energy draws people in. Now let's bring this together. Pulling back your energy creates curiosity because it changes the pattern. It interrupts what was predictable. It introduces space where there was constant presence. And in that space, attention grows, curiosity builds, and pursuit begins. So ladies and gentlemen, understand this deeply. Sometimes the reason someone is not moving toward you is because you were already doing all the moving for them. And the moment you step back, the moment you create space, the moment you allow them to feel your absence, is the moment they finally start to move. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go deeper into this second truth, because this is where attraction becomes natural instead of forced emotional independence makes you more attractive. Now, I need you to understand something very clearly. Emotional independence does not mean you don't care. It does not mean you are cold, distant, or disconnected. It means your emotional state is not controlled by someone else's behavior. It means you can like someone, even care deeply about someone without losing control of your own peace. And that right there is powerful. Now listen carefully. A lot of people enter connections and slowly start tying their emotional stability to another person. If he texts, they feel good. If he does it, they feel anxious. If he gives attention, they feel valued. And if he pulls back, they start questioning themselves. And without realizing it, their mood, their thoughts, and their energy begin to depend on someone else's actions. Now, I want you to understand something deeply. That kind of dependency creates pressure. Not just for you, but for the other person as well. Because when your emotional state is tied to someone else, every interaction starts carrying weight. Every delay feels personal. Every silence feels like rejection. And that energy is heavy. Now, listen carefully. Emotional independence removes that pressure. It allows you to interact without attaching your entire emotional well-being to every response. You can enjoy the connection without losing your center. You can appreciate the interaction without needing constant reassurance. And that creates ease. Now let's go deeper. Ease is attractive. Calm energy is attractive. Stability is attractive. When someone feels like they can interact with you without constantly managing your emotions, they feel more comfortable. They feel more open. They feel less pressure. And people are naturally drawn to what feels good. Now, I want you to understand something important. Emotional independence also changes how you respond to situations. When someone delays responding, you don't immediately assume the worst. When plans change, you don't collapse emotionally. When things are uncertain, you remain grounded instead of reacting impulsively. And that steadiness creates respect. Now, listen carefully. Respect is one of the strongest foundations of attraction. And emotional control builds respect. When someone sees that you are not easily shaken, not easily thrown off balance, not easily controlled by circumstances, they begin to see you differently. They see strength. Now let's go deeper. Emotional independence also shifts your focus. Instead of constantly monitoring what someone else is doing, you start focusing on your own life, your own goals, your own growth, your own happiness. You are not waiting for messages, you are building your own momentum. And that momentum is attractive. Now I want you to understand something deeply. A person who has their own life, their own direction, their own sense of purpose becomes more interesting. Not because they are trying to be, but because they are not centered around someone else. They are living fully, not waiting passively. And that kind of energy stands out. Now listen carefully. Emotional independence also protects your self-worth. Because when you are not dependent on someone else's attention, you stop accepting behavior that does not align with you. You don't tolerate inconsistency just to keep someone around. You don't overextend yourself just to maintain connection. You choose, and choice is power. Now let's go deeper. When you are emotionally independent, you don't chase clarity, you allow behavior to reveal it. You don't force conversations, you observe actions. You don't over-explain your value expected to be recognized through interaction. And that creates balance. Now I want you to understand something very important. Many people believe that showing more emotion, giving more attention, and being more available will increase attraction. But when it becomes excessive, it often does the opposite. It removes mystery. It removes space. It removes the natural rhythm of interaction. And attraction needs rhythm. Now listen carefully. Emotional independence creates that rhythm. There are moments of connection and there are moments of space. There is interaction and there is individuality. There is closeness, but there is also personal grounding. And that balance keeps things healthy. Now let's go deeper. When a man senses that your happiness is not dependent on him, something shifts in his perception. He no longer sees you as someone who needs him for emotional stability. He sees you as someone who chooses him from a place of strength. And being chosen is more meaningful than being needed. Now, I want you to understand something deeply. Neediness creates pressure, but choice creates attraction. When someone feels like they are being held on tightly, they feel restricted. But when they feel like they are being chosen freely, they feel valued. And that difference is everything. Now listen carefully. Emotional independence also makes your presence more valuable Because when you are not constantly available, your time becomes more meaningful. When you are not always giving energy, your energy becomes more noticeable. When you are not always focused on them, your attention becomes more appreciated and value increases. Now let's bring this together. Emotional independence does not push people away, it pulls the right people closer. It removes pressure, creates balance, builds respect, and allows attraction to grow naturally instead of being forced. So, ladies and gentlemen, understand this deeply. When you are emotionally independent, you don't lose connection, you strengthen it. Because you are no longer operating from need, you are operating from choice. And when you choose someone without losing yourself, that is when you become truly attractive in a way that cannot be ignored. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go deeper into this third truth, because this is where attraction becomes undeniable. Men respond to absence more than constant availability. Now I need you to understand something very clearly. This is not about ignoring someone. This is not about playing games. This is not about pretending you don't care. This is about understanding human nature. Because people do not always recognize the value of something when it is constantly in front of them. But when that same thing is no longer as available, attention increases. Now listen carefully. When you are always there, always texting, always responding instantly, always keeping the conversation alive, you remove the space for someone else to step in. You become the constant. And when something becomes constant, it becomes predictable. And predictability reduces excitement. Now I want you to understand something deeply. Attraction is not just built on connection, it is built on anticipation. It is built on wondering. It is built on thinking about someone when they are not there. And those feelings cannot develop when there is no space. Because constant availability removes anticipation. Now let's break this down. When you are always present, the other person does not have to think about you as much. Why? Because you are already there. There is no need to wonder what you are doing. There's no need to miss you. There's no need to reach out first. Everything is already being given. Now listen carefully. But when your availability changes even slightly, something shifts in the mind. The person who is used to your presence now experiences a gap. And that gap creates thought. It creates curiosity. It creates emotional movement. And that is where attraction begins to grow. Now I want you to understand something important. Absence does not create feelings that were never there, but it reveals feelings that were already present but unnoticed. It brings awareness to what someone feels when you are not around the same way. And that awareness is powerful. Now let's go deeper. When you are not constantly texting, not constantly initiating, not constantly filling every silence, you give the other person a chance to act. You give them a chance to miss your energy. You give them a chance to wonder about you. And wondering leads to thinking. Now listen carefully. Thinking leads to emotional attachment. Because the more someone thinks about you, the more space you occupy in their mind. And when you occupy someone's mind, you become more important in their emotional world. Now I want you to understand something deeply. Absence creates emotional contrast. It shows the difference between having you and not having you. And that contrast makes your presence more valuable. Because people often understand value through comparison. Now let's go deeper. When you are constantly available, there is no contrast. There is no difference between having you and not having you because you are always there. But when you create space, when you step back, when you allow moments where you are not present, that contrast appears. And that contrast creates appreciation. Now listen carefully. This is why people often say they miss someone after distance. Not because the person suddenly became more valuable overnight, but because the absence revealed what was already there. Now I want you to understand something very important. Absence also activates effort. When you are always reaching out, the other person does not need to. But when you stop doing that, when you step back, when you allow silence to exist, the responsibility shifts. Now they have to decide, do they reach out or not? And that decision reveals their level of interest. Now let's go deeper. If there is real interest, absence will pull them closer. They will text. They will call. They will check in. They will try to reconnect with the energy they feel is missing. But if there is no effort, then absence reveals the truth of the situation. And truth is always valuable. Now listen carefully. Many people are afraid of absence because they think it will make someone forget them. But the reality is, if someone forgets you simply because you stopped overgiving, then the connection was not strong to begin with. And holding on tighter would not have made it stronger. Now I want you to understand something deeply. Absence also increases mystery. When you are not constantly explaining what you are doing, where you are, who you are with, you become less predictable. And when you are less predictable, you become more interesting because people are naturally curious about what they do not fully know. Now let's go deeper. Mystery creates intrigue. Intrigue creates attraction, and attraction creates pursuit. But all of that requires space. It requires moments where you are not fully available, not fully known, not fully predictable. Now listen carefully. This does not mean you disappear completely. It means you stop overextending. You stop making yourself the center of someone else's attention without them earning it. You allow your presence to be something that is experienced, not something that is constant, and that makes it valuable. Now I want you to understand something very important. When you balance presence with absence, you create rhythm. And rhythm is what keeps attraction alive. Too much presence becomes overwhelming. Too much absence becomes disconnection. But the right balance creates interest, and interest keeps people engaged. Now let's bring this together. Men respond to absence more than constant availability because absence creates curiosity, activates effort, builds anticipation, and reveals value. It gives space for emotions to grow instead of being constantly satisfied. So ladies and gentlemen, understand this deeply. When you are always there, you are felt less. But when you create space, when you allow absence, when you stop overgiving, you give someone the chance to truly feel your presence by first experiencing your absence. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go into this final truth, because this is where everything becomes real. Self-worth shifts how a man values and approaches you. Now, I need you to understand something very clearly. Self-worth is not something you announce. It is something you demonstrate. It is not about telling people your value. It is about how you carry yourself, how you respond, what you accept, and what you walk away from. And people don't treat you based on what you say about yourself. They treat you based on what you allow. Now listen carefully. When your self-worth is low, it shows up in subtle ways. You over-explain. You overgive. You tolerate inconsistency. You accept less than what you truly want just to keep someone around. You chase clarity instead of receiving it. You invest more than what is being returned. And over time, that behavior teaches the other person something. It teaches them that your standards are flexible. Now, I want you to understand something deeply. When standards are flexible, effort becomes optional. Because if someone sees that they can show up halfway and still have full access to you, they will not feel the need to show up fully. Not always out of intention, but out of human nature. Now, listen carefully. Self-worth changes that completely. When you know your value, your behavior becomes different. You don't overextend to prove your worth. You don't chase attention. You don't stay in situations that consistently drain you. You observe, you respond, and you choose. And that choice is power. Now let's go deeper. A woman with strong self-worth does not react impulsively to every emotional situation. She does not panic when communication slows down. She does not lose herself trying to fix every gap. She remains grounded. She gives space. She watches behavior. And that calm energy creates respect. Now I want you to understand something important. Respect is not built through words, it is built through boundaries. When you have boundaries, you show people how you expect to be treated. You show them what is acceptable and what is not. And when those boundaries are clear, behavior adjusts. Now listen carefully. When a man encounters a woman with strong self-worth, something shifts in how he approaches her.